Hi, thank you for letting us in your beautiful home. This one as well as the one that we measured on 48th Street. Um, so we're just gonna tell you a little bit about the project and what this interview entails, which way it's gonna, proceed. Um, we're with the BLC Field School, UW Milwaukee, and this project is basically documenting the houses and the stories of the residents with the houses and with the community. So this is basically going to be sort of a roadmap for the interview. Um, we want to know and hear your voices and your stories, your life histories, um, your stories with the house, and how you and your house interacted with the neighborhood, in terms of social relations, or having friends over, your memories with the house, your memories with the neighborhood, that kind of thing. So basically, I would need um, you guys to fill out consent forms, that giving us the authorization to both conduct this interview and have this information available publicly. Um, and uh, so this is one set. Okay, so we have two sets, one for each person. And I would like it if you guys could sign it right now. And if there are segments that you don't want, segments of the interview that you don't want to be made public, you can just let us know and we'll take that segment out of the public record.
So it's really two different.
Yeah, just two different
forms.
forms, and so yeah, this is one set, and then
Since I can't read it right now, I'm gonna trust you. I don't have my glasses in here.
well, we can pause if you want to get the glasses. This is my contact information.
I'm putting both down. I'm gonna put both down.
It's 17.
Thanks.
So, before we begin, just a couple of things about the audio recording. We are going to make sound bites available on the internet as part of this project. So, I mean, I'm going to be not speaking as much. So in your responses, you know, if you could, you know, like speak in full sentences, because we won't.
Oh,
If
the
we,
question won't be there.
yeah, if we transcribe interviews afterwards, we can edit it, but in putting the audio file up, I can't, you know, fill in the sentence to complete it and stuff, because it has to be in your voices, you know. So, would you mind starting with just an introduction of who you are, names, you know, what you do, where you live, that kind of stuff? I will start with you.
Well, I'm Judy Howden. We now live at 4277 West Highland Boulevard, but previously for 34 years we lived at 1430 North 40th Street. I'm a retired social worker.
I'm Mike Howden. Thank you for coming to our house, our homes, and including us in your study. I'm a retired social worker. We've lived here for many, many years on the west side of Milwaukee. We moved here in 1968. Choosing to move to Milwaukee from Green Bay, Wisconsin, because we wanted a more of a city with variety of all kinds as a place to raise our children.
What year was it that you guys?
1968, we moved to Milwaukee.
Okay. Was the house that you moved into the 1430 property, the Von Bambach house that we did? Is that the house that you moved into straight away, or?
No, when we first moved to Milwaukee, we rented a house on 25th Street, I guess it was, North 25th, right off of Elite Street. And then a year later, we purchased a duplex, which had been foreclosed by the FHA. So we sort of have a string of houses that we have fixed up. But we lived in the duplex for about 10 years. And so our children were very young at that time. And of course rented out part of it, it provided income for us also. And then, well, Judy can tell you the story of how we came to purchase the 40th Street property.
So you mentioned moving from Green Bay. I lived in the Appleton Oshkosh area from '98 till 2009. So kind of familiar with that area.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little more about the choice of Milwaukee and choice of moving out of that area? Was it for a job, or were you looking for a particular kind of community that you didn't see in Green Bay? And I mean, be honest, I don't. It's not like, you know, you won't be like offending me since I've lived in that area. I know some of the pitfalls of that area.
Actually, we might be offending some people, but probably they're long gone at this point. We very purposely left Green Bay. At the time we lived there, which was in the 60s, I mean, most people there loved it. It was the glory days of Vince Lombardi and the Packers, and everything about life in Green Bay revolved around the Packers. Weddings, funerals, everything was set according to the Packers schedule. We are not spectator sports people. we tend toward the arts. We like theater, music, art. And so we really didn't feel like we fit very well in that community. But the bigger issue was there was virtually absolutely no diversity there whatsoever, other than ages, of course, but certainly not ethnic diversity. There were black football players, but they were these superheroes or something larger than life. And so, at any rate, we did not find that environment the kind of place we wanted to raise our children. And so it was a very purposeful move to Milwaukee where there was greater diversity, and where we chose in Milwaukee was very purposeful, that it was a neighborhood of multi-ages, culture, income levels, etc. So, and we had always lived in the oldest neighborhood, oldest area of a city wherever we lived. So this neighborhood fit that as well, and we always lived by a park, and so again.
Since you guys mentioned children, would you could you talk a little bit about them? How many children? What are their names?
Oh, sure.
And,
We have 4 children. We have 2 boys and 2 girls. Our oldest is Therese, and the youngest is Sarah, and the boys are in the middle, David and Eric. And basically, I don't know what else you'd like to know about them. I don't know what's apropos on the kids, honey. What do you want? What do you think?
Well, we have sort of a multi cultural family also. We have a son-in-law from Ireland and a son-in-law from Colombia, South America. Let's see, we have two of our children are teachers. One has done international development work in South America, now works for GE Medical. And we have one son who lives in Los Angeles. He escaped the Wisconsin winters many years ago and comes back only to visit every year. And he works for a organization that develops supportive housing, or housing with supportive services for people who are homeless. So all of our children Judy and I are both retired social workers, so our children have sort of followed us in service kinds of making a living, ways of making a living. And we have 7 grandchildren, by the way, all of whom those families live close to Milwaukee, close to us.
What are the ages of your children? Were they born when you guys moved here?
The children, our children are a little clump. Mike used to say we had a family where the kids were all the same age, and it did feel like that. We had 4 children in 6 years, so we had this little clump of babies. They were born from 64 to 70. So they're getting up there, which also says we are, but it doesn't feel like it to me, but we are getting older.
So some of them were infants when you guys moved?
Oh, when we moved here, we had the first 2 children. Therese was 4 and David was 1. And then Eric was born living in that upper duplex on 25th and Vliet. And we actually were there a few years longer than Mike remembers. But at any rate, then Sarah was born right after we moved to the other duplex in 70, a couple months after we moved, actually. So anyway, they've lived along Vliet Street as long as we have, really. this is our neighborhood, this is our community. I mean, when we decided to downsize from the 40th Street house, it's a wonderful home. When we get around to it, I'll tell you how it called to me and why we live there. But at this stage of our life, it's a big house, and it was really too big for us since all the kids left. It was a wonderful place to raise them, but 2 people in that large house was a little out of proportion. It had a wonderful big yard, which we used for many years with a massive garden. And then after the kids weren't there and we didn't need to raise so many vegetables, we switched to perennials because I love doing flower arranging. And we had lots of picnics out there, and we really used the benefits there for many years, but it was at a point where it had tipped the other way. There was a lot of work for 2 people, and the 2 of us do a lot of volunteer work, so we're not sort of, well, we could be home and doing it, but we choose to stay active in the community. So as we aged, something had to go, so we decided to do less of that work and moved here. And a lot of people thought, I think, it was kind of an odd decision to move down the street, but this is where we are. I mean, this is where we've lived. This is where we've invested our time and energy, and so why would we go someplace else? So here we are on Vliet Street.
Could you talk a little bit about raising children here when you guys moved here with kids? And you mentioned the park specifically being there.
Yeah.
You know, just gives a sense of like the street life and the neighborhood life and the park and the house.
Sure.
With kids.
I mean, to be perfectly honest, when we moved here, it was the fall of 1968. In Milwaukee in the summer of 68, there was, I mean, what they called it then was race riots. It was during, obviously, the 60s when lots was going on in anti-Vietnam demonstrations, but also all of the civil rights marches, etc. And Milwaukee, was part of that. There were some, and some of them are were relatives of ours, that thought we were totally crazy choosing where we were coming to. Not only Milwaukee, but then when we specifically chose the area we did, it was, they didn't care for it. And actually, they thought we wouldn't survive, literally wouldn't survive. But anyway, we have, obviously, and we've thrived, and we got what we were searching for. It was a very diverse neighborhood. It was a time when lots of stuff was going on. And so from little on, our children learned what our values were and why we thought it was important. I mean, we raised them thinking the world was their neighborhood, not just Vliet Street. And that's how we have a couple of foreign-born in-laws. I mean, they took us seriously. The world is their neighborhood, too. That we should be active, we should be engaged with people, all different peoples, we should be learning from them, and we should be giving back. And so, I don't know if that really answers your question. As far as the park, this was designed by the same gentleman that designed Central Park in New York. And the idea was, I mean, we don't have anywhere near the congestion here that they did in New York, but the idea was that with people living in such close proximities, there should be these open spaces for people to relax and enjoy themselves. And by the time we came, that glory phase of the park, I think, was past, but this was ethnically a German area originally, this neighborhood. Even after we moved to the other house in 1979, there were very old German, especially men, I mean like upper 80s into their upper 90s, who would stroll down the street. And Mike was out working in the yard a lot when he wasn't at his paid job. And they would stop and kind of kibitz with him about life before. And they would talk about Surrey races in the park. And if you're familiar with the art called Sunday with George in the Park, famous painting. That's what Washington Park used to be. People dressed up in their very fine clothing and their parasols, and they went to the park and strolled and, around the lagoon and got a breeze. And there were concerts and gazebos and the horse races, etc. And then the next era after that, that's very old history, but after that, the band shell in the park had huge productions. Thousands of people would assemble there. They were free, but you had to have a ticket, which was their way of kind of controlling how many thousands of people showed up. And they were big name entertainment from all over the country, Broadway stars and so forth. And they did these humongous musical productions on the stage there. And that was called Music Under the Stars. And that went on for a long time. So there was all this wonderful cultural and recreational use for the park. Well, for a period of time, the zoo was there too, but it had moved by the time we moved here. There were a few raccoons and various sundry guys that hung around, and they would show up in the yard every so often, and theoretically they were left over from the park. But basically, and I don't know anymore today, but when our kids were little in the winter, when they sledded in the park, the hill facing the lake was where the buffaloes used to be, and kids, not current kids, but kids our children's age, would refer to it as going to Buffalo Hill to sled and so forth. And people knew where the monkeys used to be was Monkey Island and so forth. So that was an era too in the park when the zoo used to be there. So that to me, that's important too for quality of life. So we use today I walk. Well, we both walk for exercise, but my preference is to walk in the park and go to the lagoon. I practice Tai Chi, and it's a lovely place to do Tai Chi practices over in front of the lagoon. And now we have, well, not only the senior center, I also go there for classes, but the Urban Ecology Center, which is a wonderful addition to the park now for the area children. And I've met a number of young teens who I think without urban ecology, they'd be wandering the streets, but they've been trained beautifully as group leaders, and they're very knowledgeable. And when I take my grandkids over there to look at the animals, they'll let them feed them, and they engage beautifully with young children. So, it's the current new use for the park, and it's wonderful. Soccer fields too are over there. So there's lots that it has to offer, and we continue to benefit from it. Long answer, I'm sorry.
No, for the purpose of this interview, would love long answers.
Oh.
Anything you'd like to add?
Well, yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that, well, before we lived so close to Washington Park, we lived on 32nd Street for about 10 years. That's where our duplex was that we purchased and fixed up. And a lot of the children from that neighborhood benefited from Neighborhood House, which was originally started as a settlement house. And it's a little further south than Bleed Street. But all of our children went there from early on for various programming. And a lot of the kids actually got jobs there during the summer. They went through the summer program, and then as they got older, they would be hired as boat counselors for especially the summer program, where the kids were taken to one of the, actually Greenfield Park. They were bused out there, as well as a farm west of Milwaukee for many years. So that was another big part of our children growing up and benefiting from a really good institution here on the west side.
I forgot about that. No, that's good. I had forgotten about it, but yes, that was a huge part of our kids' lives and ours. Nice place. The city used to have health clinics there, so I could take, when you have a bunch of little kids who need immunizations, it was a lot easier going. I could go over there on foot or on bike, and the kids could get their well checkup and get their immunizations at neighborhood house instead of having to go to a doctor's office far out and so forth. So we always utilized whatever was in the area. The one thing that's lacking now that used to be available is there used to be two or three grocery stores, again, within walking. Well, there were some corner stores that used to be real corner stores, not what corner stores are now. I mean, they had real food and fresh meat even, cut to order. But there was also a Kroger's and a Kohl's grocery store at 35th and Juneau. But all the grocery stores moved out. And so this is a food desert. It doesn't affect us personally because I have a car and I can get to where I need to go, but a lot of people in this neighborhood do not, and it's a real negative thing. And I have written and appealed to a couple of chains, well, more than once, but like many, everything's gone conglomerate now, which I think is a bad thing. But anyway, they don't want to. They go where the money is, and the money's in the suburbs, and so they don't care whether there's food here or not, I think. So that's a bad thing, I think.
Are there other residents who are thinking about the food issue as well that
Oh,
you know
yes.
of? And is there any?
And there's many groups, Mike. I'll tell you, I mentioned before, we volunteered multiple ways all of our life. And we're on all kinds of committees and to improve things. And I don't remember exactly what year it was, but I got to a point where I just got tired of going to meetings, and I gave up on meetings. And I kept thinking there must be another way to conduct business besides just sitting there and hashing things over. And so many times it felt like we've had this conversation over and over, and where's the action? Mike is a much more patient person than I am, and so he goes to a lot of meetings and stays involved, and he does go to those food meetings too. You might want to address that, honey, because I dropped out on the meetings.
Well, yeah, we've been advocates for real food or better food, for healthy food in the neighborhood for many years, and have worked with various organizations on this, but I'm afraid that we really haven't accomplished very much at all. There is a contingent on the west side that not right here in the Washington Park neighborhood so much, but further east, which is very dedicated toward trying to make something better out of the convenience stores, the corner stores, and the gas stations. I really don't believe that that's the way to go, or that there's any success in doing that. So it's still very much an unresolved public health issue on the west side as well as other parts of the city.
We did. I mean, this isn't going to address the real big issue, but it helps a little bit. We were part of a very small group that started a farmer's market in front of the senior center on Sunday mornings, we chose Sunday because most of the farmers already are committed to other farmers markets around town during the week, and especially Saturdays, but they weren't committed on Sunday. And the farmers, I use that kind of in quotes, they're not full-time farmers, but they're all Hmong Americans, and they live right in the neighborhood, a couple of them right almost across the street from the senior center, and they, of course, farm elsewhere, or they garden, I should say. But so they are our neighbors producing the food, which we think is a good thing. It gives them another outlet to sell it. It adds a little more diversity because they grow a few different things that a lot of people around here are used to. And so it just started this past Sunday. It starts the middle of June and runs into October, the end of harvest. And so there's 3 or 4 farmers. There's also David from Amaranth Bakery comes a lot of times and will sell bakery on lunch items and so forth. And then there's some artisans that will also vendor there. So it's a kind of a nice little neighborhood place to go and meet people. It's from 10 to 2 on Sundays. It's not going to solve the issue with food year-round, but it's certainly a supplement in the summer where people can get produce. I mean, if they really are in a bind and they're going to a corner grocery for canned goods or something, they can supplement it with some fresh produce, and it's wonderful. I mean, the strawberries last Sunday were just like I picked at my grandma's farm when I was a little kid. They're not those big weird things from California that don't taste like strawberries. So it's real food with no additives and not killed with fertilizers and stuff. These Hmong people really know what they're doing, and they really take great pride in it. So it's something. It's a additional something for the neighborhood.
Okay. Could you, you mentioned that you guys were and are active in the neighborhood associations like food and could you give me a sense of, you know, going back in past, like what organizations were there that you participated in 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? I mean, I know this is probably too big a question, but just
No,
whatever
it's not
you
really.
can think of.
Well, see, in all these years, we've moved from 25th to 41st because that Juno house was a block and a half off of Elite. And that's not very far, but there used to be lots of separate neighborhood associations, so we've moved through a number of them. When we first came at 25th and Valide, it was called Midtown Neighborhood Association. And I think it was pretty soon after we arrived that we got real involved in that, wasn't it? But part of it was a very politically charged era of history. I mean, houses were being torn down like crazy at the time. That was sort of the neighborhood issue at the time. And actually they built sort of a little, I mean, it looks like a little suburbia right on Valise Street at further east, and put its back toward Valise Street, which is the main street, and sort of made it almost like subdivision is. You know, you have to come in from another way. But anyway, that's kind of what happened. But we were real involved in Midtown Neighborhood Association. Then when we moved a little bit further west, 7 blocks, that was called Cooperation West Side, or their acronym was CAUSA. Midtown still exists. CAUSA does not. Well, we think it does. But anyhow, then we got involved in that group because that's the one that was in that neighborhood. When we came to 40th Street, what was the organization? Oh, that was CAUSA, and then Land. I forget what that's. Lisbon Avenue.
Neighborhood development.
Yeah. And now, Mike, like I said, I've dropped out of meetings, but the one that's very active now is Washington Park Partners. And so Mike goes to housing especially, and I don't know, what else, Mike, do you go to there? More than that.
Well, the business and the health committees. Another organization on the west side that really saved a portion of the west side housing, very good housing south of here, was, I'm not sure they can remember the name, but
West Side Conservation.
West Side Conservation Corporation, which was really a housing agency, and saved a lot of very good Victorian era stock around what had been Concordia College, and is now being developed by the Potawatomi Indian people. But Concordia College had expected to expand in this location along State Street, and they gradually bought up a lot of the very, very nice houses, and they were going to tear them down. Well, luckily they decided to move to the North Shore rather than to expand at the old location. So they left a number of buildings which were unused for many years, college buildings, and some of them still are not, but gradually they're being redeveloped for use. And Westside Conservation took on the houses and helped people purchase them and fix them up. And it's really a historic district now, with really great housing stock. So that's part of what has gone on over the years, is the various neighborhood organizations as well as sort of focus groups like or more focused groups like Westside Conservation. And there's always been some work on business districts also, but not a real lot has been accomplished with that. Both Miller Brewery and Harley Davidson have also, well, fortunately they've stayed in the neighborhood on the west side, but the downside was that in the process they did purchase a number of good houses along Highland Boulevard or in that area, and either tore them down or in a few cases they did save them by moving them. But a number of really fine houses were lost to development by for the expansion of Harley and Miller.
Parking lots mostly.
Well, the Miller office buildings too. But anyway, so it's a mixed bag of struggles. Losing local business districts and businesses, and the struggle over the years with housing, with slumlords purchasing a lot of houses and neglecting them and letting them go. And for some years before the crash of the last decade, we were making some progress on reducing the number of boarded properties, and then things got worse again after 2009. And currently, as you probably know, we're making some progress again with the help of Habitat and Axe Housing, as well as some other developments. But to say the least, it's a constant struggle to ward off the slumlords and the boarded properties. And, but there are some positive signs in this regard with more proactive city programs to assist in this, and as well as the Habitat and Axe Housing.
Okay, so let's move back to the time that you guys moved here. You mentioned, Judy, that your relatives were worried about you guys because of...
It actually was Mike's relatives. Okay. Mine probably, if they had been more involved, would have been too. I don't know. But anyway.
So there were probably, these are the times of the open housing protests and Father Crappie, right?
Yes.
So when you guys moved here, were the protests in some form or the other still ongoing? What were your impressions when you moved here, if you could recall anything? And if, with the passage of time to the time that you got to 1979, right, is when you bought that property.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that the things have changed? Like you mentioned, German neighbors German. Stopping by. Did you notice any the sort of ethnic composition? What it was when you arrived in this neighborhood to the time that you bought the property to, even right now? And this is a large question.
Well, and I'll probably forget some of the aspects of your question, but you ask about sort of race relations when we first came. I think really the summer of '68 there were so-called riots. We weren't here. We came in October. And that was kind of like the worst of it, right? I mean, there was still an awful lot of discontent. But, I mean, we sort of got on with the business of meeting people and learning who was our neighbors. And we take people for who they are and how they act, not what they look like. And people have reciprocated. I mean, we've been accepted just like we accept other people. So we never had any problems. And that's what we taught our kids. The people who were real, fearful, I think. Fear is a pretty awful thing. I think it's like a cancer. But anyway, are people who go by, this is my opinion. People who let their life be guided by fear are people who live off of perceptions, not out of knowledge from experience. As we were, I initially did not work. I had that little clump of babies I mentioned to you before, and my job was really taking care of them, and I used to do a lot of canning of our vegetables and all kinds of stuff. Eventually, when the youngest one was 8, I did start working. And, I started working outside of the home. To be really honest, through our work years, which were many years, rarely did anybody that we work with feel comfortable coming to our home. And that was all based on perception. And that people would say, oh, it's this and this and this there, meaning my area. And it was what they would say it was. It wasn't. I lived there. I had the experience. But they would project to me what they thought. And none of it was based on any kind of experience. It was whatever, I don't know. And it was before the media is like it is today, what they thought it was or what they heard it was or what somebody said. And so, to be honest, I think that's just ignorance. And so that's their choice. And I'm straying. So anyway, that didn't bother us, so to speak. Our kids learn to be what I call street smart from little on. I also worked in crime prevention for many years. I worked in the district attorney's office, and I was a victim advocate for elderly victims. And I specifically was placed at children's court because the victims that I advocated for had been victimized by juveniles. And so I worked daily in the climate of the so-called bad kids. And I worked there a long time, and part of my job was teaching for prevention. So I would go out and do presentations to groups at like senior centers or wherever elderly people assembled, trying to help them not become a victim. And it's so all of that is so ingrained in me. But it was beforehand with my own kids that I couldn't be really careless on the street if I tried. There's a sixth sense that I think you develop. And I do that not just on Valete Street. To be really honest, when I get really out in the suburbs where there's no street lights and it's pitch dark and you can't see anything and you don't know who's coming at you, that's when I feel much less comfortable. Here there's street lights, there's buses driving around the corners, there's people moving around. When I go for a walk, people address me on the sidewalk. I look at them, they look at me. It's much more humane and human interaction. So I feel very comfortable here. And there were times when our kids had some incidents, but what they learned was the lesson I wanted them to learn. There are black kids that are mean and there are white kids that mean. It has nothing to do with being black or white. They just, they haven't been taught manners or whatever the case might have been. And that's that's the conclusion I think our kids learn some of the times too, if they had an incident coming home from school or whatever. And the two younger ones shared a paper out back when kids, delivered papers and they'd have to collect. And they came to the same conclusion. Some people just never had their money and kept telling them to come back 6 times during the week. And, it had nothing to do with race. I mean, some people are just not very with it, or considerate of other people. And so anyhow, I guess what I'm saying is we never really had any big problem like had been predicted, because we weren't looking for problems. We were looking for solutions. We were trying to meet people, get along with people. We had our kids in community schools. They went to public schools for the same reason, to get to know all the people of the earth. And so anyway, that's my reaction to how things went. And I forget what the rest of your question was after that.
The ethnic makeup.
Oh, the ethnic makeup.
Change.
Yeah, the Germans did sort of die out. We're Catholic, and we went to St. Michael's, which is 24th right north of Leeds. So we walked about a block and a half to church. And the kids it turned into a community school, and the kids went there for a while. And as the old Germans died out, then the next wave of immigrants were Hmong and Laotians. And as they came into the neighborhood, I mean, it was very obvious a change at church. Actually, St. Michael's today is sort of a model of races coming together. I don't think it could be more balanced if a sociologist had stepped in there and designed it. It's almost equal numbers, or percentage, not numbers, but percentages of whites, blacks, Hmong, and Hispanic. And they recognize all of those cultures. And I mean, they don't every Sunday, because, you really spend a long time at church, because they'll have every reading in all the languages, etc. But anyway, so that's how St. Michael's transitioned over the many years. But there was a priest there who really was instrumental in helping the new immigrants purchase homes. And so in that immediate neighborhood, they had far less slumlords coming in and scooping up and taking advantage, because he helped the folks buy a house, and they would fill it up with all their relatives. And it was, the same as home ownership is for most people. They were very proud of it, and they took good care of it. And the housing stock, was maintained. It was very old, but it was maintained well, and so forth. So that's their neighborhood. In the 40th Street, by the time, when we moved there, we were it was pretty predominantly white yet at 79. When we left last year, we were probably about the only whites on the block. Not probably, we were. So that neighborhood transitioned. There's Hispanic families too, and actually, as it turned out, both south and north of us immediately were Hispanic families. But the rest are mostly African American, and the Hmong American Association is just not a couple blocks, a block and a half down. So there are a lot of Hmong around, though they weren't immediately on our block. So that's the mix now of the neighborhood. Most people, I think, get along okay. I don't think it's not the exact same, I don't know what word to use. I mean, you don't find people like those old Germans meandering down the street and chit-chatting about old times, because these folks haven't been there from long ago, and they don't know that history, and I don't know. That aspect, I don't think, still exists. But people coexisted comfortably, don't you think? Unfortunately, especially me, I have no facility with foreign languages, and we do have this bilingual family, and we've tried over and over, and I never get past about first grade level in Spanish. But so we do have some problems with, No, we didn't, because mostly from Mexico. I mean, they really put us to shame. Within a year of being here, they were speaking very good English. So, ended up not being a big problem because they learned our language and we didn't learn theirs. The family on the other side didn't speak as much English, but the kids did. And Mike would loan them a ladder or something, and even if the fella couldn't speak English, I mean, you could understand he was very grateful, And so body language and just tone of voice and stuff. So we would do stuff like that. Our plum tree hung in their yard. Most of it was over in their side, so they used to pick the plums, and then they would bring a pan over. So then I would make 2 desserts and send one back. And so we could still do those kind of things even though we didn't chit-chat. So that's kind of how it is now, wouldn't you say, Mike?
Yeah, I don't think there's close friendships in the immediate neighborhood, which includes here.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a diversity of people, and we get along and we're friendly enough. But at least right in close area, it's not a real chummy kind of a neighborhood like you might see in a movie, but we get along. And on 40th Street, there are still some slumlords who don't, and property owners who don't care for things very well, and so it's it is a constant struggle to urge people to do what's right with their property, and sometimes it's a matter of making complaints to the city about especially slum landlords and to get things fixed up. Something you have to do.
Well, it seems like our discussion is moving closer to the house itself. I would like us to basically talk about both houses, but let's talk about the 48th Street house first. Could you describe, the house, the layout, and whatnot for whomever who may listen to this interview?
Do you want to know how we got it? How we happened to buy it? Yeah. Why don't you start with that?
Start with that. I was going to have you do the layout since my thing is so big, honey. You see this is lopsided verbally. Now this is going to sound really strange, but this is exactly what reality is. When we came to move to Milwaukee, I mean a couple weeks before, or whenever it was, we'd come down for a weekend. His mom would take care of the kids, and we'd come down for a weekend and search. And so we were looking for an older, diverse neighborhood, was our goal. And initially we start looking in another area and then discover, well, first of all, we hadn't been married real long. We had these 2 of the 4 children, and I wasn't working, and Mike was working for a service agency as a social worker, so had a very low salary. So we had very little money to work with, which wasn't a problem to us. Money's not a big issue for us. But when you have to pay rent, you had to be realistic. So, I mean, we were not in a purchase mode at the time. We were looking for some place to rent. But anyway, the area that we first were looking in, we discovered had very little rental. They were very small bungalows that were homeowners. And, they went up for sale occasionally, but not often, and nobody rented them out. So we switched our focus, and we were using Lisbon. We were coming from up in Green Bay, and we came in, and we'd come down Lisbon Avenue, and we kept driving down Lisbon Avenue, and then a number of times down 40th, and we were looking in this whole general vicinity. But I kept saying to Mike, hey, here's our park. And then the house really did call to me right from the beginning. And I said, wow, look at this house. This is going to be our home. Here's our park. Here's our home. And Mike kept saying, yeah, we're looking for a rental. We're not looking for a house. We're looking for well, it turned out to here, the language was a flat. So he kept trying to say, this isn't realistic. So we moved on and we found that duplex and we did rent it and we moved there. And even after we moved here, I would drive, the bank we banked at was further northwest of here, not real far, but anyhow. And I often we had one car at the time, I would ride my bike to the bank and I would go up 40th and I'd stare at the house. And I kept talking about the house. So that was in 1968. Eventually, we realized after we had the third child, we really did need more space. And we did start looking to buy. And I really started advocating for the house. And Mike kept saying it's not for sale. And even if it was for sale, we couldn't afford it, etc. And we ended up buying that foreclosed house, duplex, on 32nd, because that's what we could afford, and it was still in the area. And it was okay. The rent that we took in helped us. It was in pretty bad shape. Mike did a huge amount of work on it. He would paint one side every year. Take him 4 years to get around, and then it was time to start again, and he'd just keep doing it. And he did, lots and lots of work there to bring that house up to speed. And there came a point where now we had the 4 kids, and it was an okay house, but there were no hallways. It was a whole bunch of little tiny rooms. There was no hallway, so everything opened onto each other, and it was a very noisy place. Nobody had any privacy at all. And so we were really looking to kind of expand. And Mike's idea was, we lived on the first floor, we rented out the second. So
You can skip that part.
well, no, it's integral, honey, because of the timing. So Mike's idea was we moved to the second floor. This was a typical Milwaukee duplex with one of those great big peaked roofs. And I think in the first lecture they talked about how even though the room wasn't used, there'd be a window and everything it looked like from the outside a room. Well, this house actually had one of those, and I think somebody actually had slept up there and stuff. There was linoleum. Well, anyhow, so Mike said, here's all this unused space. So his idea was to make the attic into bedrooms and link with an internal staircase, and we'd live on the second and third floor and rent out the first floor, which was going to be a big chunk of money to do that. And I kept saying, yeah, but if we sink all that money here, how are we going to buy our house, which still wasn't for sale? But there was a time when I was coming back from the bank that I was staring at that house. I was going about 5 miles an hour. I was in a car that day, and staring and staring. And what we had realized, we had never seen anybody at that house. We couldn't figure out what was the deal. And this particular day, the guy who owned it was coming out the back door. And you know how you can kind of feel somebody staring at you? You do a double take like that, and his head jerked around. And I thought, oh, wow, he must wonder what I'm doing, which also sounds stupid, but that's how I thought at the time. So there's that alley that's really a street, and I thought, well, I ought to stop and tell him. So I pulled in there, got out, and I said, oh, I'm sorry I was staring at your house, but I really like it, blah, blah. And unbeknownst to me, that house attracts people a lot. It used to be way more than now, but kids and all kinds of people would stop and say, is this a school? Is this a church? What is this? Because it doesn't look like anything else on the block. And we didn't ever mind that while we lived there, that people did that. But this guy, we found out later, hated it. So why he gave me the time of day, I don't know, because he really disliked people asking anything. He didn't want to talk to him. He didn't want to tell him anything about the house. But anyhow, I said, I was staring at it because I really admire it. And he talked to me for a long time, for about a half hour, at the end of which I thought, I was thinking, it's getting kind of long, I ought to let him go. And instead of him saying, goodbye, he said, would you like to see the inside? And I thought, oh man, would I like to see the inside? Yeah. And so he takes me in and gives me this grand tour of his home. Well, I thought, now I really have to have this house. I loved it. And so when we were parting, I said to him, we already live in a house, which we own. We can't afford 2 houses. This was before Mike's idea about converting the other one. But I love it. So if you ever sell your house, would you let me know? And he said yes. And then I went home and did what my mother had taught me, which was to sit down and write a thank you note to somebody who had done a kindness. So I wrote this formal thank you note, saying what I just said to you about, if you ever decide to sell it. Sent it to him. And apparently his son, who really didn't like the house at all, for whatever reason, well, I guess the man, his name was Kirby, put the note in his desk drawer. He ran a business out of that house, and the den, what we used as a den, was his office. And so he put the note in the desk drawer, and it stayed there for a number of years, because it was about 4 or 5 years later, which was the weekend that we actually finally signed the contract to do all this construction. It was on a Friday. They were going to come and knock walls out on Monday on the other house, because I had finally conceded that probably that wasn't going to really be our house. And it was our second child's birthday, and we're having this birthday meal. And one of the rules at our house was you didn't take phone calls during a meal, especially a birthday. You just didn't do that. You focused on the people who you were sharing the meal with. And the phone rang. The phone was on the wall, and we were eating in the dining room. And I was walking into the kitchen to get the birthday cake, and the phone rang. And, again, who knows why, because it was so out of character, but I answered the phone, and the kids are yelling in the background, bring the cake, bring the cake. And I'm answering the phone, and it was this guy's son saying, I found this note in my dad's desk, and you said you're interested in buying the house. Are you? And I said, well, yeah, I've always loved your house. And he said, well, we're selling it. Are you really interested in buying the house? And we had just signed the contract that afternoon to break out walls on 32nd Street. And I'm thinking, oh, gosh, Mike's not going to like this. And I said, you know what, I'm going to have to get back to you. So we hung up. We finished the birthday cake, and then we had this big conversation. I said to Mike, well, listen, if you don't want to check it out, we'll just forget about it. And
Fat chance.
And Mike said, yeah, right. And so we went to look, and so our agreement was, well, let's just go look at it. So we went and looked at it, and there was this wonderful yard. The backyard actually was dead, totally dead, because for 40 years he had parked his trucks and all kinds of kegs of nails and oil, and the soil was ruined from 40 years of that. But the potential was there. This big yard for our kids. Our kids were 8 to 16 at the time. No, 8 to 14. And so, anyway, we broke the contract with that contractor. He was very gracious about it. And we bought that house. And so it was our home, like I had always said it was going to be. It just took us 11 years to get there. So that's my story about our house. And so some of my relatives, my daughter-in-law kept saying, how can you stand to leave it now? You've always loved this house so much. And I've always been like this. When it was time to leave, I mean, the only thing I've really ever left was jobs. But when it's time to leave a job, no matter how much I'd loved it, I always looked to the thing I was going to, not look back, and mostly never even went back to visit or anything. And that's what I have done with this house. Mike goes over there all the time, and he keeps cutting the grass, and he keeps going and checking on everything and doing everything. I don't go back over there. I mean, I have completely embraced this house. This is our home, and this is what we need now at this stage of our life. So I have not as much as I loved it, but part of it is because I did love it very much for a long, long time, and it served us well. But now it doesn't, because I need a simpler place and less work. So
that's the story.
He's probably not going to say much more about that.
Would one of you then describe the property, the house on
Yeah.
40th Street, please.
Yeah, and we also would like to know if like because you bought a house and if you did like changes, if you build like a new room or a new wall or you demolish a wall, like if you change something in the house.
Just 1 second. We didn't, but that house, and you probably are aware of this, was written up by an architectural historian, and he had done his article way long before we even moved to Milwaukee. And when he came,
No, I actually did it the year that we moved to
that's right,
Milwaukee.
it was 68, you're right. But we read it in the journal up in Green Bay, but I mean, it didn't mean anything at the time. The guy before, Kirby, I mean, his work was a construction company. All the stuff you see in there with that wood and stuff is 1940s, and that's about when he bought it. So that's when all the major changes were done to the house. And, you know, since you're pursuing this kind of work, I mean, it was too bad you couldn't have experienced when the guy, the historian, his name is Russell, I thought he was going to have a heart attack or something when he came to the house. He just hated it. I mean, hate isn't even a strong enough word. He walked around saying, rip this out, get the, you know, there's so many things that Kirby had done to the house, which is not organic to it, and he wanted us to just rip it all apart and take it out. And we're not architectural purists, and we don't have the money to do that kind of thing, and it didn't bother us because we don't know all that architectural stuff, and so we didn't do that. I mean, Mike hired him to do reproduction doors on the upstairs so that it was authentic, and we did everything as authentic as we could, but the changes already had occurred when we got there. But go ahead and describe the layout and stuff, honey.
Well, it's a 2-story cream city brick house, which actually, according to Russell Zimmerman, the historian, had what is now the 2nd story was actually moved to the site from a couple blocks east in the late 1900s, so by horsepower. And then it was raised and a new 1st story put underneath. So resulting in 8-foot ceilings on the 1st floor and originally 14-foot ceilings upstairs. We did lower them and insulate and put firm ceilings on, which hadn't been there when we bought the house. We didn't do, other than that kind of thing, the ceilings and the insulation over the year. We didn't do major changes to the house. We did do more cosmetic things. When we bought the house, it actually had been coated, even something worse than paint. It had been coated by the previous owner, who had purchased it in the 1940s, we believe, and ran his business out of there. But we found a company that would carefully remove the color, so it to turn it back into a decent looking cream city brick house. It's actually, the walls of the house are 3, I'm not sure the correct terminology, 3 rows of bricks thick. So it's not just a brick facade. We did major upkeep over the years. We had it totally tuck pointed with the help of a city program, actually, many years ago. That was after it was cleaned, put on a new roof and things like that, of course. But it was really painting over the years, various
Inside,
times on the inside. That it was upkeep like that. The only sort of major thing we did was with the kitchen, which was very 1940s when we bought it, and had carpeting, and we did have a new oak floor put in there, and new fixtures. So it was really more maintenance things that we did over the years. It was a constant, the windows are old, of course, and so there was constant repainting and putting of windows. And eventually we did have new custom-made storm windows put on. We didn't want to do anything like put aluminum storms or something like that, so we did have new wood storm windows. We refurbished the yard. It's a very large yard considering other yards in the area. We used a lot of ground cover rather than have all grass. Some of the ground cover was actually already there. We introduced other ground cover near the house on basically two sides of the house. Our children and I refurbished the further part of the backyard. It's an L-shaped yard. We dug out several tons of many yards of old soil mixed with junk, and then brought in new topsoil over the years. Originally, the barn structure that is part of the property now had been sold to somebody else to the east, who was going to turn it into a business venture. Luckily, he didn't, and we were able to eventually buy the barn and refurbish that also, which it was in very bad condition, the upper part, and so we had to restructure that.
That was originally housing horses, and the manger part is still in there. The wood floors and stuff where they ate is still there, but that was a horse barn.
So we ended up with this overly large garage in the shape of a barn, which has to be refurbished from time to time. And a very good yard, partly grass, partly garden area. A stand of very old mature trees that go way back, whether they were planted by the von Baumach family in the 1840s or 50s or the 1850s. We don't really know just how old they are. They're really probably the trees are the same age as those in Washington Park, pretty much. The von Baumbachs had owned apparently part of what is now Washington Park. It's called von Baumbach Woods. When we bought the house, Kirby, the previous owner, he was somewhat of a recluse, it seemed, and he had allowed weed trees as well as some decent shrubbery to get very high, both in front of the house and to the north of the house. And so there was a lot of cutting back we had to do, especially in the front yard, to refurbish that, because neither he nor his son did much yard work, so it was pretty much of a mess. So there was a lot of work in terms of the shrubberies and things.
You know what, Mike? The one thing that we did change, I just thought of this when you're talking about what he didn't do, was his wife was deceased by the time I first met him. But the sort of rumor in the neighborhood was, and so I don't know, if it's accurate or not, but what we'd hear mentioned was that she really was the one that, well, I guess in early years she went out and about normally, but in her later years, which I don't think she was very old, she must have been ill or something, and I don't know what that entailed, but she didn't leave the house apparently for a long time, and that was sort of this recluse thing, but also thought the house was severe. I mean, it's a square, everything's squared off, and she didn't like that, and so he did a whole bunch of little curly-cuey things to, quote, soften the severity. He put a port window in the front of the house, a round port window, which looked pretty absurd. And then he made a wrought iron fence for around the porch, and it was all very swirly around there. And those things we did agree with this historian. I mean, they just, he also put in glass block in the front of the house in the one corner. And so things that just totally didn't fit at all. And so those things we did remove. We removed that wrought iron thing before the house was, we finished the whole purchase thing, and we just told him since he had done so much work on it, we would give it back to him. And he took it away. He liked getting it back, this wrought iron. We don't want it. And this historian had found the last few bits of the estate at an antique shop, and he had, and this is from the literature of O. Henry, that story about the husband and wife each buying something for each other. And so he told us about this, that there was only these couple things left in the estate. And that fall, Mike went to the antique shop and bought Ludwig von Baumbach's portrait, which now hangs on the mantelpiece in that other house, which we will bestow to the new owners because he belongs there. But I bought that for him for Christmas, and he bought the brooch that had been Ludwig's wife's brooch and gave that to me for his Christmas. So that was left from the estate at this antique store. So we had those two pieces, and he had a couple of these little tiny, like this, black and white photographs of the house. And from that one photograph, Mike found a mason who rebuilt the porch, where Kirby had the wrought iron thing, was, I don't know, about waist high, and it had there were bricks missing to make a design. And so this mason did a very good job of following this tiny little picture and making as close of a facsimile as he could. And we took out the port window, we did the new railing, and we took out the glass blocks. Because the other place, the glass blocks in the front looked really awful, but in the back it was even, didn't look nice, but it was also very practical in the dining room, where you'd want to be able to see out into this yard, especially when all the flowers were blooming and stuff. There was this glass block, so you couldn't see nothing, and so it was kind of weird. So anyhow, we took that out. So those were the only things that we did to...
Well, the one other thing was that we did have a restoration door, double door made for the, what is a porch in front of the house, which is really, the porch is at the second story level, because he had... introduced French doors into that doorway, as well as a doorway into the what do you call the place in the flower
solarium.
The solarium on the first door. So those were the sort of restoration things we did, but otherwise we didn't make
we
major
tried to
changes.
return it to as natural as it should have been, but not change anything. But
So could you describe the layout of the house? Just
the rooms on it.
Briefly, or how you see it.
Well, the one sort of strange thing is that there isn't a front door except at the second level, which originally there actually was a staircase up to the second level, because evidently when the house was first moved, the first level was considered more as just the kitchen area or basement.
Like a summer
And
kitchen
then
thing with a
eventually
third
turned
floor.
into regular first floor rooms, and the bedrooms upstairs. So the main entrance is actually at the back corner of the house. which is a little bit strange, but there's a good sidewalk leading to it. And then I'm sure that Kirby would have introduced this. There is he built a glass enclosure to the main entrance. So that was, I'm sure, an add-on, which wasn't part of the original house. But it continues to work for us. And so you go into a rather large living room on the first floor, and then there's a den to the front of the house, which originally was Kirby's office. There's a small workroom under the front porch. There's a relatively small dining room and a kitchen and a utility room on the north side of the first floor, and a small furnace room. There isn't a full basement.
And the half bath.
And a half bath. On the second floor, Kirby apparently had moved the original stairway to the second floor. So there's sort of a curved stairway at this point, which wouldn't have been original. And we had no way of knowing where the original stairway was. We weren't going to change that. And there's 4 very good sized bedrooms on the second floor, as well as a very large oversized bath. And then there is an attic, which we had considered making at least 1 bedroom up there, but it was low enough that we decided it really wasn't practical to do that. I mean, the ceiling would have been very low. So that's the inside structure of the house. It gave us lots of room for the 6 of us, and served us well.
Okay. The yard is beautiful, by the way.
That's Mike's word.
Okay. I wanted to ask you guys if you could tell us or the listeners what your favorite part of the house was. I mean, in my house, we have a back porch. It's a covered sun porch that overlooks the yard, and that's where my wife and I and our dogs sit, and that's where we spend most of our time. So, was there a place for you, a favorite place to hang out in the house, or favorite place to be by yourself, or what comes to mind, if there's a particular corner or whatnot?
Well, we had a very serviceable den. It wasn't real large, but that was, I guess, where we, especially at our older age, where we spent a lot of time.
Well, but you also, honey. Kirby had 2 boys, and he did all that built-in cupboard business too, which Russell hated. But anyway, we had 2 boys, so the 2 back bedrooms with all that built-in woodwork each of our boys had, and the girls shared the one front bedroom. We had the other one. I forget what I was going to say now.
Well, we turned one of the back bedrooms into an office.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, Mike had his computer.
Which I used a lot, especially after I retired.
That's what I was going to say.
But I don't know other than that there were special rooms, because they were all, furnished comfortably. And then, of course, the yard we made good use of. We did develop a bit of a patio near the entrance to the rear entrance to the house. So anyway, the yard was a favorite place, of course.
Yeah, actually, Mike mentioned the den, but that was really later when we were raising the kids. I do cook, and I cook from scratch, so I spend a lot of time cooking. And that kitchen is very small, but it works really good if you don't have people underfoot. And so, for one or even two people, it's a very efficient kitchen. So when I was working full time, I would just come home and immediately switch to cooking. And Mike could come home from work and he'd immediately put his work clothes on and be in the yard, so that while I was cooking, he was working a little bit on the yard each day. And so it changed over time. But I really liked that little solarium because when we were living there, I had between 150 and 200 plants, green plants in the house, which most other people thought were excessive, but I really liked it. And so I liked having that little area. And then I had bigger ones in other parts. So I spent, as time went on and I wasn't working full time, I spent more and more time putzing with those, which I enjoyed a lot. It was hard downsizing those. But in a way, like I said before, I don't really sort of cling backwards. I kind of look forward. And so at first I thought it was going to be impossible here to reduce the plant numbers. But in a way, I almost like this better now because, it fits my situation. There's less to take care of, so that there's still a lot of plants in there, but I see them all the time. Whereas there we had a sort of curtained, room divider thing there. And so a lot of times you wouldn't even, from the inside, you wouldn't be constantly looking at the plants. I would put that aside when I was working in that little area, but here you see them all the time, and every time somebody comes to the door and so forth. So there's always, with change, there's always something good. So I don't know. So we don't, a lot of people say the family room or this or that. We're not really like that, I think. We're not very average, really. Fortunately, we don't really follow the norms too much.
Since you mentioned kitchen, would you mind
fixing lunch? No?
Would you mind, telling us about, the kind of meals that you prepared, the cuisine, the smells that, come to your mind from the house, if it was, plants in yards, or flowers in the yards, or if it was cooking smells, and, preparation of meals brings to mind, larger gatherings that you may or may not have had with friends or relatives, if there are any stories about meals or neighbors coming over or whatnot that you could share.
Well, the big meals, Mike's the oldest in his family, and he's also older than I am, and his parents were, roughly about 10 or 15 years older than my parents. So there came a point we used to go to their houses, each of the parents, for big meals, on holidays and so forth. But when they came to the point where my parents lived in Illinois, so much further, whereas originally we were in Green Bay and they were in Appleton. After his mother had a stroke, she didn't cook anymore. And so after we moved to that house, we never had good dishes. We had all those babies. We needed service. Well, we didn't have a lot of money for buying china and stuff that wasn't functional. And we needed things that were functional with the kids. So we had sturdy, everyday dishes, and that's what we used. And so when we moved in there, Kirby had also built in a china cupboard, and I had almost nothing in it. And after his mother had a stroke, she had packed up all the dishes in boxes, and so they were just, she not only didn't use them, they were like gone. And so she gave them to me, and they had been a wedding gift. Well, there they are. They had been a wedding gift that his father's family had given each of them when they were married, which would have been in the 1930s. So when I got them in the 80s, they were, already antique, sort of. Anyway, I thought it was the nicest gift anybody ever gave me. And so therefore I thought, we really needed to use them. So anytime they came to visit, usually I would use those dishes because she liked so much that we had a place that she could, because they had a glass front. So she was in a wheelchair there, and she'd come around that corner and she'd just sit there and look at the dishes. So I knew it was really important to her. So we would use those. But anyway, because I was married to the oldest one, when she couldn't do meals anymore, then it just sort of fell to me. And so we had hosted all the big family meals then at our house for years and years and years of his family. And then, as our kids grew up, then, the same thing, they were married and had kids, but they all came. And before you mentioned, did we move any walls? Our youngest, when we have all of our kids and their spouses and all those grandkids, that dining room is not really big enough. We had that table, which extended pretty big, but to get all those bodies in there. And it was really hot. Most of the time you'd be all crowded in there. But anyway, and so our youngest daughter kept always, for a long time, used to say, you really need to move she wanted us to break out the back wall and add a sunroom or something so that the table could expand. Obviously we didn't do that, and we wouldn't have done that to the house. It just seemed like it would ruin the integrity of that house to just tack on a modern sunroom or something. So there again, here, because of the way these rooms are situated, we can angle this table, and that table over there actually extends into a long table, and we can add it, and we're still all at one table. At that house, you would have had to go around the corner, and so the table then would have been an L shape, and you wouldn't be able to talk to the people on the other end of the table or even see them. So, this is a smaller house, but in a way, it works better in a couple of different ways. Smell-wise, what do I cook? To be honest, when the kids were young, I cooked sort of like my mother had cooked. I didn't kind of think about it. I just thought, this is what you cook. When I left Illinois to come to Marquette University in 1958, and I never lived in Illinois again. I loved Wisconsin and thought it was much superior. And it used to be a lot better before the Republican takeover, and they've messed up politics, I think. It used to be clean here in the state, and Illinois has a bad reputation for not very good politics. But anyway, I did learn some new things from some of my roommates at college, and it opened my eyes to the fact that not all families ate the same thing or celebrated the same way. And so I would incorporate, my one roommate, especially my junior and senior year when we lived in apartments, and she'd cook. It would be the same kind of basic meat or vegetable or whatever, but she'd cook it very differently. So then I expanded my repertoire a little bit. But when the kids were growing up, it was pretty basic, don't you think? We used a huge amount of our fresh stuff from the garden, though, especially green beans and tomatoes and stuff. And in about March, we would run out of whatever I had canned, and I would have to switch to commercially. At that time, I did. Frozen, this seems weird, but anyhow, frozen vegetables weren't as used as often as they are now, or as plentiful in supplies. And our kids used to say, "Ooh, these green beans really taste weird. What did you do to them?" And so they could pick up the difference, even as young kids, between home canned vegetables and commercial, which I thought was very good. And so they really liked the gardens and what it produced too. Actually, the older I get, and now that I'm retired and I have more time, I try all kinds of recipes, and so what I cook and what we eat has changed. It's expanded. I just do a lot more creative things than I used to, and so I don't know about anyone's smell or anything. I do incorporate as much as I can, fresh foods, and it takes a long time buying things at the grocery store because I'm reading labels all the time, and there's so many things that they've ruined. I really resent that, what they've done to our food system. But besides that, I don't know. I do love flowers. So you mentioned about scent, and there, took us a while to catch on, but we finally switched from annuals to perennials and chose things always that were able to be cutting flowers. And so I used to always have 2 or 3 fresh bouquets in the house all the time. We had to start from scratch here, and so we don't have the stock to pull from yet. And some of the things we planted last year didn't survive this winter, so we had to do it again. But my last job was at a funeral home, and I learned how most people aren't as excited about flowers as I am. And a lot of people don't even want the flowers that are left at the end of the funeral, which I think is kind of strange, but they don't want them because they're funeral flowers, and they're not. They're flowers that happen to be sitting at a funeral. I mean, they haven't turned into something else. So anyhow, I recently volunteered at a senior residence to, when they get bouquets, so they'll call me and I'll go in and disassemble them from big funeral spray into, like regular bouquets for their dining room and for their patients. So, because I really miss working with flowers and, putting them together aesthetically. So it's more visual, I think, than aroma that I associate with flowers, but I like the color. I like fresh things. I like living things. So I don't know, those are some of them. I don't know about Mike's memory. He's more I do the inside stuff and he does the outside stuff, because we just do the things that we have more of an inclination toward. So I don't know if you remember his question, Mike, about smells and aromas and food and Mike doesn't like cooking much.
Well, just to say that Judy's a wonderful cook. We have great meals with real food, and
I cook it, he likes to eat it, so that's good.
and I don't like to cook.
Yeah. So we don't compete.
Although I was forced to for a few years. I retired earlier than Judy did, and because I'm much older, and somewhat older, and so anyway, I was forced to learn how to cook. But she actually prepared the menu and gave me the recipes. But I did do it for a few years, reluctantly.
That was because if he waited till I got home from work and then first started cooking, we didn't eat till 7, and he really wanted to eat at 5 because he was hungry.
Not 5.
5:30s, and so that was what he had to do. But then I took it back again, which is good.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, works.
Actually, I saw a perfume cabinet.
Over
upstairs.
there, yeah. I have to figure out what to do with that. Our son, our oldest son, when he was getting ready for high school, decided he would go to what was then called Boys Tech here. And it gets a lot of negative press now, but back then it was a coveted school to go to, and you had to have certain scores to get in. You had to really work hard. And he is the kind of person that if he really, really wants something, he can just about kill himself to get it. And if he doesn't want it, he doesn't do it. And it was totally his thing. So he worked really hard and he got admitted, and they did wonderful things there. I mean, that was his first year projects, were things like that little cupboard. But they made furniture like this as juniors in high school. I mean, I couldn't believe it when I'd go there. But anyway, so he learned a lot of skills, and I used to have a whole bunch more things that he made, but now the house is stripped. But so he made that cabinet, and my one aunt that I was very close to used a particular kind of perfume, and she gave me a couple of those bottles, which were they used to change them every couple of years, so I have a couple different versions of that. And then my father died 10 years before my mother, and my mother had a suitor, I guess I would call him, eventually during that time, and he showered her with very elaborate gifts, one of which was perfume that was always in some exotic bottle with like a dove sitting on the top or something. And so then she would give me those. And so anyhow, that's how that collection of bottles started. And I mean, this is a long time ago, and David had made that. And so I displayed them that way. and it's the last thing that, well, there's some furniture we have to get on there yet too, but I kind of forget that's still sitting there. I'm not sure what to do with that. I don't want to, I don't throw things away easily, so I have to like find somebody that would want it so I can bequeath it, and I don't know what to do with that. But that's why that's there. But then at the end of his freshman year, there was a huge crisis. I don't even remember what year that was, but anyhow, there were a lot of carpenters out of work. It was a housing crash, and he just decided he couldn't go back to school. And we kept saying, you know, there's always going to be carpentry work to do, and a housing thing will revive. But he switched schools. He went to Rufus King then, and he did well there. But anyway, so he had that little brief stint. But he used his skills, because he could only take college in short doses too. And so he ended up in England and then went to Israel, and he worked on a kibbutz. And there's very strict separation of the sexes. So all the girls did childcare and kitchen duty, and all the guys, it was a humongous chicken farm, 500,000 chickens in the desert, which seems contradictory to me. But anyway, because he had those carpentry skills, he built chicken coops as his contribution. And so he did a lot of those things through the years. So he always, those carpentry skills were kind of a good little thing, even though he's the one that's in housing for the homeless, but he doesn't do the building. So anyway.
What year was the kibbutz?
His experience, oh gosh. Well, he was born in 1966, so when he was he would have been during college years. So how old would he have been? That would have been in the late 80s, huh? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he would have been there.
So going with the theme of, like you described, you like the sight of flowers, and we talked about smells. What about sound? How did the house sound? What were the surrounding sounds?
That's a good question.
The reason why that brought to mind was there was earlier a mention of squirrels, and since I have dogs, I was going to ask if you guys had pets or ever had pets in that house, or neighbors' pets. Was it noisy on 40th Street is now kind of busy, but
oh, it's very busy. What, we got really used to city sounds, and so we'd be in that house and we wouldn't hear anything. I mean, you did, but you didn't. It was like background. When his parents used to come to visit, they would from Appleton, and they lived up on the bank of the Fox River, so I suppose that was kind of insulated from sound where they were, but they would be complaining all the time about, I don't know how you sleep here, I don't know how you can stand it, but they didn't like Milwaukee, really, basically. But anyway, so they'd make a big thing about it. And, well, we do have a pendulum clock, and Mike doesn't usually set it anymore, but that would be ticking, and it really can be kind of loud. But we were so used to it, it would just be in the background. And the same with the buses, when they shift after they come around the corner, you'd hear that. When the 3rd District Police Station was up here at 47th and Valete, Valete and 40th was busy streets for police cars zooming around with their sirens blaring. But for us, it was always just like real distant back. We'd hear it, but not pay any attention to it. And ironically, there is noise there, you're right, but it didn't bother us at all. And I am surprised. I have noticed it. Our kids mostly thought, I think they thought we should go to a condo or something someplace, but we'd never do that. And so they, I can remember one of them saying, "Oh, you're so close to Valete Street now, it's going to be so loud," which I hadn't even considered before they said that. And I thought, well, yeah, this is a bus line. And then some of these buses turn here and come down. And I see the buses more than I hear them. They really aren't very loud.
So we've really gotten used to city street noises.
And it just
really isn't a problem.
Does it sing loud to you here?
No,
Not to me at all. I mean, to me, it's very close, and it's kind of like almost the same intersection, but this house is even quieter to me than that house was. But it didn't bother me over there. We didn't have pets, much to the chagrin of our kids. We just didn't. We had all those children. Well, we did have a dog once. That was the worst decision of our life. I forgot about him. Oh, we had all those little babies, and then we had a puppy. Oh my God! And I have to say, I am just dog ignorant. And Mike always had pets, right? You always had a dog, so you should have known more. But we didn't know what we were doing in this. It was a golden. He was cute, but he just kept growing and growing and growing. And I kept buying those 25-pound bag dog food and thinking, oh, I should be buying some extra treats for the kids instead of this dog food all the time. Anyway, and our neighbor worked nights, and he tried to sleep during the day, and we were right on the alley. This was when we were on 32nd Street. We were right on the alley, and the kids had a wire fence, and the kids would come by with a stick and go like this down the fence, and it just drive the dog crazy, so it'd race up and down and bark at him, which really wasn't good for the neighbors. So unfortunately, we didn't have him very long. So, I don't know, they had guinea pigs and different silly stuff like that for a while, but we never really did have many pets. Now, the second Mexican family that moved in did have dogs, and it was sort of interesting at first when they'd come out. I hang laundry outside. I do a lot of things that other people don't do, but anyway, when I would hang the laundry, the dogs would bark at me. And so I got to the point when I'd go in the yard and they'd start barking, I'd start talking to them, and I would just keep a steady stream of, kind of in a monotone. And after about 3 weeks, they didn't bark anymore. Now, unfortunately, this guy has 3 huge dogs, but it hasn't worked. So they bark every time we step foot outside. But much to their probably not health, he keeps them inside a lot, so they're not out making a lot of noise a lot of the time. So we don't have pets. We do have a son that has a dog, and he brings him every so often. But that's about it. So he doesn't want to talk about pets.
So could you, was there any, at that property on 40th Street, any interaction with the neighbors or neighborhood residents that was not pleasant? I mean, you've mentioned sharing of plums, the German neighbors stopping by, but was there any kind of conflict that ever occurred in 40th Street with the residents of the neighborhood or just the immediate neighbors? Maybe over pets.
Well, there were, over the years, there were a lot of different people who moved in and out, and even the houses on either side of us changed ownership a few times. Sometimes with property owners who didn't take care of them, sometimes with the people who actually lived there. For the most part, I think the relationships were pretty good. There were times when, especially in one of the houses, there were tenants who were not, who were noisy and really didn't control their kids very well. We never had huge conflicts. And sometimes, and people, different time, some of the owners took care of things better than others, but for the, like I mentioned before, it wasn't a real close neighborliness among people, and so there was, which was sort of fine on all sides. I think that we got along without knowing people really well for the most part. Some of the neighbors we got to know much better, including some of the renters. Mm-hmm. and we're friendly with.
But like Daniel, honey,
Right.
real good friend.
Yeah.
You know, the house to the south is owned now, and for quite a while, maybe 10 years or so,
Yeah.
by a Mexican family, and they moved out to bigger and better things, I guess, far out. But all their not different family members from their extended families is who they basically have rented to mostly. And that house was originally a one family, but Kirby had also owned it and had broken it into 4 units, little units. And then when it got rehabbed, when that Mexican family bought it, they chose to make the front up and down like a whole house, and then just 2 little apartments in the back. And so some of these relatives of hers that would come used it as like a way station while they could earn enough to buy something better. And this one, I forget, it was Daniel's wife and that owner's wife were sisters. But anyhow, he was there with 2 kids in this little tiny 3-room apartment until they could afford their own place. And in Mexico, he and his father were both professional painters, really good. And here, he fortunately got a job with a restoration company where they go in, like if a church has a fire or something, they go in and restore it. So when Mike got to the age where he didn't feel like he wanted to keep painting anymore, he would hire Daniel. He's a great guy. He's a wonderful painter. So he painted the inside of that house. And then he used to hire him to do clean out the eaves and the gutters. And Daniel, I don't know what the situation is, but anyhow, whatever kind of visa he has, I think he's not free to travel back. So he doesn't see his own family. I mean, a lot of them, the siblings have moved here, but his parents. And I really think that he sees Mike as a surrogate father. And Mike just hired him to do a couple of things. He was over there. And I said to Mike, well, how's Daniel? And what did he say? And he said, well, he's like he always is. He does everything I ask him to do. So I think Mike could come up with any kind of awful job, and Daniel would do it. And so they were very nice. And they had this little tiny yard, and we had a big yard. And by that time, most of them, like our aunts and uncles, are gone. I mean, our family now is our kids and our grandkids. So, I mean, for a while we had these huge picnics, but then they shrunk down. And so a lot of times we wouldn't be using the yard. So we would just always let the families in that house to the south of us with all this extended family come, and they would have these big Mexican meals. They'd make their own tortillas on their own homemade little grill. We just let them use the backyard because, they didn't have a big backyard. So, I mean, that was more how we interacted more than, come over for a barbecue or something like that. I mean, they used to, after they'd use the yard, sometimes they'd say, come and eat with us, and sometimes we would. So, we get along with everybody. It wasn't like Mike said before in the movies where everybody's sort of sitting in each other's yard drinking or something, or whatever they do, I don't know. But it was friendly and compatible.
I want to take a few minutes just to talk about this house. What is the address here, if you could state for the listeners?
Well, we're now living at 4277 West Highland Boulevard, which is a bungalow, much smaller than our other house that we've just discussed.
Okay.
I could just mention that this is a 1922 typical Milwaukee bungalow. Sort of by coincidence, actually, we knew a woman who had lived here for a number of years, up until probably 8 or so years ago, and then she retired and moved out of town. And so since it's very close to where we had lived before, we knew the house and we had observed it for many years, especially after she left. There were a couple of different owners, and then there was apparently foreclosure and neglect by Bank of America for a while. And then when we were looking for a new place, a smaller house, we did look quite extensively on the west side. And then we were aware of this. We liked the looks of it. We knew that there was probably some repairs that needed to be done, but we did decide to pursue it and eventually bought it. So this is our new home for our old age.
Could you describe the layout of this house? We especially haven't, been in this house.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I guess it's a typical bungalow with rather large entryway, lots of windows throughout. A good-sized living room, medium-sized dining room and kitchen, and 2 bedrooms on the first floor, one of which we use as an office and TV room. And then when we bought it, it was very partially finished upstairs, and somebody else had started making some changes on the second floor, and we finished them and into one large room, plus a sort of entranceway and a half bath upstairs. And there is a full basement. It's a well-built house with a good basement without water problems or anything like that. The inside of the house is very nicely done with good wood, very good wood paneling, a lot of wood built in, with a fireplace, with a wood mantle, and bookcases alongside the fireplace. So it's really a very, really fine paneling in the dining room. Not even sure, cold ceilings, whatever you call them, with some ornamental trim. The kitchen was probably redone over the past probably 10 or so years. So there really weren't a lot, other than finishing off the second floor and refurbishing the damage that had been done by the bank when they didn't winterize it, which was extensive cost. Other than painting everything, that was the main thing that we had to do, was to have it painted on the inside.
Change the bathroom.
And we did change the bathroom to make it more usable for our age. So it's in good shape now.
Any favorite places in this house? I mean, you mentioned the china. If favorite places or favorite objects.
Well, one of the things I really, really like is the other house had those like floor to ceiling windows, so there's a lot of light there. The little bit of downside on it was anybody walking around the house can see directly in, because wind or break in a lot easier when your window's right at the ground level. Here, because you have to come up a few steps to get into the house, it's not like even here, somebody walking on the sidewalk, unless they're really, really tall, aren't going to be able to see in. And the same is true of like the kitchen windows. So there's lots of, the shutters that Kirby had put in a lot, and so we used them in a lot of places. But here we just have these thin curtains, so it's not so, it feels more open to me and a lot more sunshine coming in. So that's a favorite thing of mine here. And those arched windows out there are very good with the, well, some of the plants didn't like the move, and we were facing west before, now we're facing east, so some of the plants didn't survive because of that, but basically the ones that I'm now situated are doing fine. They're getting the light they need, so I like that a lot. One of my, I don't know what else to call it, but a problem. I have a lot of nerve damage in my legs and feet, unfortunately, and therefore, and that house didn't have a basement, had a utility room, which was right outside the kitchen. So for years and years, I could, come home from work, throw in a load of laundry, be cooking, and when it was finished, throw it in the dryer with, 3 steps to do that. So I was very used to that convenience. And so at this stage of our life, in my deficiency, or whatever you want to call it, was not a smart time to start lugging laundry from a basement up and down. And so when we were looking at houses, one of my requirements was we had to find a place where we could fit the laundry on the first floor. And a lot of houses didn't allow for that. Years ago, most of these Milwaukee houses had pantries. And that 32nd Street house, when we had 2 babies in diapers at the same time, we put cupboards in the kitchen and then quit using the pantry as a pantry, and we had the washer and dryer in there with a folding door. So it was the same thing. The laundry was right there and easy. So for most of our married life, I have it pretty easy for laundry. So I needed that. And this house, besides all the other positives and that it was in the area we were comfortable staying in, had that little breakfast nook. And some of our kids think it's really weird that the laundry's in there, but they don't have to live here, so it's okay what they think. And it's very functional for me. So we have it kind of behind the refrigerator. You probably saw it. So it's there, you can see it, but it's not like in the middle of the kitchen or something. And I don't do laundry when we're eating, so I don't know. Anyhow, so we were able to work that out because most of the houses really didn't allow for it in any practical way. So I like that. It's not something that you'd advertise sort of as your favorite thing, but it's a very practical thing at this stage of the game. So anyway, and we have a nice garage. Some of the houses had very tiny. A lot of the bungalows either didn't have a garage or it's a very small single car garage where you can just get one car in it, no lawnmower or anything else. But this one is a double garage, so it's kind of nice. So anyway, so they're nice features.
Mike, yours? Any favorite places or favorite objects in this house?
Well, we do use primarily, actually, that's right, I forgot that you hadn't gotten the tour of the house yet, but there's had been a bedroom, which we use for our sitting area and for our office at this point. And so we spend really a lot of time, ironically, in the back of the house. We also have a deck that the previous owner had built along with a cedar fence around the backyard. It's sort of a small backyard, but it's very, very good. And so we've planted a lot of things back there, and this year especially. And we have this deck which you can walk right out of the back room onto the deck, so it's very handy. So it's very nice for summer.
Yeah, we ate out there a lot last summer. It's very easy to just walk out there with your food.
Do you grill outside or just cook inside and take the food out?
Usually cook inside and take the food out.
We're not grillers.
You mentioned, or actually, that we haven't had the tour. Would it be possible for you to give us one?
Sure, of course.
Okay. Just before we do that, the park seems to be, this house is also, you could see the park right by, and so with the other house. And you mentioned, Judy, how the park, the use of the park, how people use the park has changed. Did you guys used to use the park then, and how do you use it now, if you use it?
Well, when the kids were growing up, they would just go over there on their own. And I mean, when soccer first started in Milwaukee, it was called the Milwaukee Kickers, and it was kind of a low-key. I mean, it's gotten real competitive, I think unfortunately now. But then it wasn't, and we were never into football at all. It seems like a lethal kind of way to spend your life. But anyway, soccer seemed much better for kids. Plus, girls and boys could play together, and there was no big deal, and so it just made a lot more sense. So in those early years, the kids would just go over there and have their soccer practices and games and stuff. And they would skate on the lagoon in the winter and play in the snow, and and they could do a lot of that on their own, which might sound sort of silly because parents kind of hover over their kids these days, but we really didn't. The kids could do that kind of stuff, and we didn't drive kids to 10,000 things like parents, our own kids, do for their kids now. So it was kind of different, and the kids did those things. Now I go to the senior center and do exercise classes, and I have a book club there, and and we're on the advisory committee there, and so participate in a lot of activities over there. I take our grandkids to Urban Ecology Center, and to some of their programming, or just to go over and see the animals. We had the 5-year-old with us yesterday for the day, and so on our way home, me taking him home, we just stopped there to look around and see the animals. So we do that kind of stuff now, or walk. We go to the concerts on Wednesday night. We're at the farmers market on Sunday mornings, so we use the park a lot. Before we got patio table and stuff on the deck, I used to practice Tai Chi out there, and so aim myself toward the park. So visually, it's a really nice backdrop, I think, to life in the city. So I like everything about the park, really. I don't know. You probably use it similarly.
Yeah, I do walk in the park quite a bit. It's just a great amenity to the neighborhood, of course, and we really appreciate the work of the Urban Ecology Center, locating one of their centers here, and it's meant a lot. There is always some concern about safety there. We probably take it pretty lightly compared to some, but we feel it's really a relatively safe place, and we don't have any qualms about going there alone anytime, not at night, but during the day.
Since you mentioned safety, crime in the neighborhood, could you talk about that? How residents think about crime in this area? How you guys think about crime in this area? Do you hear those sirens, cop sirens, a lot? Do you think of, what do you think of, when you do? You mentioned the.
I thought of that before because, I told you how I swore off meetings. The one area that I sort of make an exception at, because of my lifetime at Children's Court, migrated mostly to housing issues. I always was on crime. It sounds funny, a crime committee, but you know what I mean, crime prevention and so forth, safety committees. And so for years and years, we've been involved with the police directly. I don't know, maybe we even started it, I can't remember, because it was way back during, and you're probably not from Milwaukee, but there was a police chief here with sort of famous / infamous reputation named Breyer. And so our first stuff was during his era, where everything was, no contact with civilians at all. But we still formed a partnership with the captain at 3rd District. That was an active district station then. And for each succeeding captain that came in, and sometimes it was a very small gathering of citizens that would go and meet with them and dialogue and try to get information and try to be involved in a positive way. And that has just blossomed. Our current captain is fantastic, just absolutely fantastic. I mean, not that the others were bad, but this guy is just head and shoulders above anybody I've ever met in in working in the crime area. And he really meets very often. Now it's at 47th and North. He holds these meetings every couple of weeks for citizens and sort of focuses a different area of the police district. So it's very open-ended. You can say anything you want. You can ask anything you want. You can challenge anything. And he shares information very freely. And there's just this real give and take on that. I find a very interesting kind of difference between that neighborhood and this neighborhood, which is almost kind of weird since you can just sit here and look at the other house. We were in Washington Park Partners, and the perception in Washington Park is a lot different than when we first came to town, but there's still remnants of that's kind of not all that safe of a place to be, and all that kind of stuff is kind of more the sense there. On this side, we're in Martin Drive neighborhood in terms of the geographic neighborhood over here. And the folks over here, I think, do know each other much more. Like Mike said over there, people aren't real chummy is the word he used. Here there are pockets on these streets off of Elite from the expressway down to Highland. Is the neighborhood association. And a lot of the people who've been involved in it a long time do know each other very well on a personal basis and are very actively involved, and there's regular meetings all the time. And the statistics on crime in this Martin Drive neighborhood because of that is like virtually zero. I mean, I think it's like the safest neighborhood in the city type of thing, which is kind of bizarre coming across the street. But there's isolated exceptions, but basically, and part of it is everybody is super aware. I wouldn't call it fear, like that crazy fear, but just very aware. And so they do things like have their porch lights on all the time, and they encourage people to know, like if you have a neighbor that's working nights and coming home alone, what time do they usually come home, and if you're still up, watching out, and all that kind of stuff goes on very, very much on a daily basis over here. That wasn't conscious. I mean, some of us did that over there, but not everybody. And so anyway, it's never been any kind of a big fear for us in the first place, but if anything, it's kind of nice to know it's a lot less. But like I said earlier, I couldn't be careless if I wanted to. It's just sort of a built-in strategy of life that I have. So, we lock doors and we have lights on when we're gone, and, not hard things, but just cautious. And I'm always very aware of who's around me and what's going on and so forth. And I think it really is important to look at people and respond to them and talk to them and know who's there. And, when I'm walking in the park, I because of my legs and balance issue, I use walking poles. And so I haven't started this year, but last year, I can't tell you how many groups of little kids, like middle school kids, would come up and say, "Hey lady, how come you're trying to ski in the summertime?" And, stuff like that. And so I would just stop and talk to them. And sometimes it was the same group of kids every day. We'd have sort of the same conversation. But I thought, as long as, I want them to know who I am and what I'm about, and, that I know who they are without any kind of threat stuff. It's just in the part. I mean, that's what you do if you're. And I do the same thing on the sidewalks. And I'll tell you, minorities are much more friendly than the white people, which I don't know if a lot of people realize that, but that's true. Very few white people who I pass on the sidewalk say anything. They look the other way. African American people around here will greet you. It's not a lengthy conversation. What's up? How you doing? That kind of thing. But there's always something exchanged. And I like that because it says, yeah, I'm here and I see that you're there. And so, I don't know. You probably got the notion. We're not fearful people. And I don't think there's a big reason to be fearful. And I think it's a kind of a negative way to conduct your life.
Well, Leo and I, since we worked in the 40th Street house, we kind of have a feel for, the neighborhood there. We don't of this part, the Highland Avenue. You mentioned that you guys, when you, I think it was when you moved there, you were the only whites in that 40th Street neighborhood?
No, that was almost all white when we moved there, but when we left last year,
okay,
yeah, it had transferred over, yeah.
So since you mentioned that this Highland Avenue neighborhood is, even though it's across the street from 40th Street, there's still, difference in terms of crime statistics and general impressions of which areas.
Mm-hmm.
Are there ethnic differences between these two, quote unquote neighborhoods? Because they're like right next
to each other, yeah.
You can't. I'm having trouble, thinking of this as a separate neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll tell you how, the day I really started thinking of it as a separate neighborhood is we had Uverse over there. Uverse doesn't serve this side of Elite Street. I mean, what kind of stuff is that? It's like we're in a different planet or what? And I thought, oh, we're obviously in a different neighborhood. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. It's kind of arbitrary. I think, if you take a couple of blocks or something as neighborhood, there's probably, I don't know this for sure, but my perception is the percentage of whites to blacks over here is more equal than it was over there.
This is a very diverse neighborhood here,
Yeah.
truly diverse.
The Highland.
With Martin Drive.
Martin Drive, when
Oh,
you
Martin
take it
Drive.
all over. But don't you think there's more white homeowners over here, huh?
There's a good mixture of there's Hmong, a few Hispanic, Caucasian, and African American. It's truly a very diverse neighborhood, both in terms of the home ownership, and there's a lot of apartment buildings down along Martin Drive, and it's just a very diverse mix here, which much more so than the Washington Park neighborhood.
Much more than what?
Much more diverse.
Much more diverse.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mixture is, whereas that has switched so much.
Mhm.
Yeah. That used to be more diverse, yeah. And there's probably a higher percent of home ownership over in this neighborhood, which always helps. And there are a lot of apartment buildings. They're very, well, I don't know if they'd legitimately be called historic, but they're well cared for. And they're pretty substantial apartment buildings down there. And the owner of a lot of them lives and is very active in this neighborhood and is a very good landlady. And so that always helps, a lot less of distant owners who aren't involved in the neighborhood at all. So all of those things are helpful, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned, I think Mike's mother lived in Appleton.
Yeah.
By Fox River. I've lived in the same area. It's a refurbished old mill that they converted into apartments.
Oh.
You mentioned the historic apartments, and they tend to be really nicely kept and quite high in rent in comparison to other places in Appleton when I lived in that area. I'm assuming here too, the rents would be
Yeah, I think.
high.
Well, no, these are relatively minor or
Modest.
modest rental in this area.
Okay.
Along Bolete Street, further down, there's more apartment buildings. But yeah, in this neighborhood, no, they're not high-end rents at all. No.
You know that.
And some of the buildings, apparently, we haven't been in a lot, but there's a lot of great woodwork and things like that.
Architecture, yeah, in
A
those
lot
big
of
ones.
good features in the apartment buildings down along Martin Drive.
Keep wanting to have somebody show me their apartment, but they haven't yet. You know, the one thing that you didn't ask, but I mean, just what I've noticed when we first came to Milwaukee, the way, and maybe this is true of other big cities, I'm not sure, but in the 60s and before, every main thoroughfare, about every 6 or 8 blocks, had an intersection of retail, useful retail. So when we moved to 25th, at 27th and Volete, there was a grocery store, 2 small grocery stores, a fruit market, a dime store, a drugstore, and a bank on that one little corner. So all very useful businesses, which was very useful to us. We had 1 car. Mike used it for work. I had these little babies, so I had a stroller and a couple little toddlers, and I could walk a couple blocks with these kids and get most anything I needed. If I was sewing and just needed thread, I could go to the dime store and get it. I mean, every cross street like that, 35th and Volete was like that. Up on North Avenue, every 8 to 10 blocks, there was a hub of. And that all went out. I don't know, when did that all die out, Mike? I can't even remember.
Just gradually, but
It's
it's a long
just
time.
gone. Now, on Volete Street, I mean, we are dedicated Volete Street people. Down further, it's real. I mean, a little bit over here, there's 3 or 4 businesses. Where's Eat Cake? What would that be about? 44th or 3rd?
43rd.
There's 3 or 4
We
businesses.
really have to go the other
But
side.
when you go the other side of the expressway, which back then wasn't there, but when you go down further, like from about 50th to 60th starts Wauwatosa, but that 10 blocks is just alive and thriving. One of our big volunteer jobs is at a fair trade store there called Four Corners of the World. It's at 54th and Volete. It's a not-for-profit.
But sure, you use that in the.
And we have 1 paid staff, but the rest of us are all volunteers because the proceeds go to the artisans. That's the whole point of it. And we've been involved in that. Well, Mike started it for 7 years. And each year there's more businesses, more good businesses. There's art galleries down there. There's fair trade coffee shop. There's 2 very fine restaurants. There's a floral shop. There's just all sorts of things. And so it's not like the old days with the corner, but it's the current version. So you can go just down the street and get lots of good things to eat, drink, and buy. And so I think that's one difference between, I mean, it's still a little arbitrary because for years, we went down there from there. And so anybody over there could do it too. But in people's consciousness, this neighborhood here, Martin Drive, is much more aware of all of what's on Volete Street, I think, than the people over there are. I mean, I think maybe they think more east and these folks think more west, or I'm not sure what, I'm guessing. But there's a lot of good things along Volete Street as you move along past the expressway, which kind of cuts it off there. So anyhow, that's quality of life aspects that are present, which is another reason why would you want to leave such a good neighborhood? We didn't want to.
And there's been a number of attempts, both on, all of these streets, Volete, Lisbon, and North Avenue. And there's been somewhat more success on North Avenue to rejuvenate the business areas, although there's still not a lot there. But we really haven't been very successful. There's individual success stories like Amaranth Bakery, but ain't a lot other than that to speak for in terms of decent businesses. Fast food, a lot of fast food and junk on 27th Street, but or 35th Street, but not much else. So that's, I mean, there's good things happening, but there's a lot.
But way back
more
when we
that needs
first
to be
came,
done.
every third place was a tavern. Not a nice bar, just an old, smelly tavern. Literally every third business from I don't know how far.
But there were a lot.
Just a huge number, like 40 in 10 blocks or something like that. It was just, and so gradually, well, then they got replaced with either storefront churches or hair braiding or daycares. That was flourishing. And there's nothing
Or corner stores.
per se wrong with those, but again, you can only have so many of one kind of business in a neighborhood before it sort of tips the balance. So anyway, so things get good and then they go back a little bit, and so you just have to stay involved always.
Well, the commercial has really not improved significantly.
Yeah, that was one of the things Mike, when he first retired, he used to do it as a volunteer for that. I mean, we used to have what they call them, block club meetings, and Mike used to show businesses and actively try. He doesn't have a real estate license or anything, so it wasn't like buying and selling or renting, but just as an interested neighbor trying to interest people in renting places from like 40th, well, even 40th down to 35th to revitalize some of that, because those used to be some shops too that when we first moved there we'd go to. There used to be a really good hardware store that went out. So, but anyway, mostly that wasn't successful as hard as you worked on that over and over for a couple of years. So you win some, you lose some.
You mentioned block club meetings. What years are we talking about?
Well, when we first moved there, I think, well, not maybe right away. What years would those have been like? I don't know.
Well, we had wasn't so much of a block club, but we had a small group that were working on commercial revitalization.
That's true.
Yeah, block clubs have never, right here, in the immediate area, have never really taken off.
Yeah, it's more now. The model that's used more is neighborhood associations. So like Barton Drive, when they have their monthly meetings, they rent the senior center hall and everybody goes over, well, not everybody, but whoever's going to attend goes to those meetings, and it's a great big group and it's on sort of common turf, so to speak, as opposed to inviting a bunch of people you don't know into your home. So people just seem more comfortable with that, I guess. And I don't know, where did we used to meet when we hit, where did we meet, Mike, when that group was meeting? I can't even think. But they were in more public buildings too. Oh, Babians used to be there and we'd be at their building maybe. So I guess they were in some of the businesses. But even a couple.
There are areas certainly within the 3rd District where block clubs are very popular, but this is not one of them.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you'll have to excuse me. I have to get going. Thank you very much for your time.
Sure.
Thanks for doing your part,
Thank you.
whatever it may develop
Yes.
into being.
I can't understand how you make a play out of that.
Anything more that you would like to add or talk about? Because I think we need to meet people at 1.
Ooh.
He needs to come back for us to wrap it up.
You have a tight schedule.
Yeah, because now I need to put the record on computer and tag, and they will teach us how to do.
Need to wrap it up, honey. I have another appointment. Do you have anything to add?
No, I just want to thank you for your involvement in all of this, and we're looking forward to whatever kind of a product to produce.
Yeah, it is kind of fun that way, I think. So.
I would like to say thank you very much for having us, for like opening the house for us to measure. I'm not from here. I'm from Brazil, so I'm learning, and it's amazing to know how is the culture, the houses, because I'm studying architecture, and this house, the house on the Fourth Street, they are so beautiful, like something that I couldn't imagine to see. And thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
You're welcome.
And you don't feel bad missing the World Cup back home? And all the hysteria and then
I'm
screaming.
following on the internet and what is happening. And US did a nice job yesterday.
Yeah, our son-in-law apparently was watching when I took the little grandson home. He quick reported that, I think it was before they won, but it was obvious they were going to win or something. He was reporting that, but we don't really follow it. Our daughter was just in Brazil recently for her job, so she gets all over it. She was in Sao Paulo, huh? I think.
I guess.
Yeah, I've been in São Paulo in less than 2 months because it's time to go back and finish my major there, my undergrad there.
Oh,
I just came for a year.
oh, I see. Huh.
So the documents that we were going to scan, would it be okay if I call you in the afternoon to just see what time suits you
Sure.
for us to
Tomorrow, right? Or today?
I don't know if we'll have time this
Okay.
afternoon or if it's going to be tomorrow.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I'm sure we could figure out a time. We have, a few things coming up later in the week, but we can figure out a time.
Not Thursday. We won't be home Thursday afternoon at all.
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. It's
You don't
I
get
don't
bored?
feel like leaving. It's like I have
Well, you
to.
come back then. You can come back again.
Okay. Is that going to be okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I mean, on a personal interest,
So do you live here in Milwaukee?
no, I live in Sheboygan.
Okay.
My wife works there, so
Oh, so you have
I
to
have
commute.
to commute. Yes.
Wow.
But I'm really interested in that late 1960s era protests. There's a really nice history book that came out a couple of years ago called Selma of the North. It was about open housing protests in 1960s. And so, that kind of, it's history that happened here in this
Right.
city, and so, okay.
Very good.
You want a quick tour?
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I forgot that. Good. Yeah.
Just, I think we should put it to surround, right? It is on surround, right?
I don't think you have battery. You should change for a channel, but I don't think it will work.
So this, there's the two, what would be bedrooms, but we just use the one bedroom. This is our redone bathroom with a walk-in shower for our old age. So we have so this is sort of our where we live most of the time with
Your office.
our den and then we don't have the furniture. Probably later this week we'll move the furniture around so we can have direct access to the deck. We just put the furniture out last weekend. But anyway, we really have a nice backyard. in the kitchen with Judy's favorite thing, the utility room. And we have actually, we don't use the dining room unless there's somebody else here. We just eat all of our meals here. And she has a washer and dryer, and we have great light, great windows.
Absolutely, it's lovely. There's sunlight. Oh, and you could see the plants there too. Great.
Yeah, when we bought this house, everything was overgrown with lots and lots of weeds. This part of the backyard and this whole area, which is overgrown with weeds, and so it took a lot of work to get rid of them. But somehow, all of those ferns out there, and some of the other flowers had survived all of that. And like last year, there was many fewer, but they've come back. We didn't plant
Well,
those.
You took all the weeds out, so now the ferns took over, so really nice. If you wanna just look out the door, you can see the little, if you wanna go out there, just, there's the deck's to the right, you can see how we can just go directly from that other room.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful home.
Victory Garden folks brought us some soil, we purchased soil from them, so that we have
And this is the garage? Right?
this is the garage.
Yeah, now that it's so nice to be outside, like all the sun and the warm weather.
Yes, it's very nice. Yes.
You have
And
a-
see, it's not real loud. There's
Yeah.
cars a lot, but you hear it, but we don't pay that much attention to it. And there are really a lot of birds. At the other house, there was a cardinal that would come and sit at the top of the tree all the time when I'd be out in the yard. And so I learned to kind of answer it. And so we were joking about whether the bird had moved. Now, there is a cardinal over here. It's probably not the same one, and it doesn't react the same. But there's a lot of birds out here. I woke up just for no reason, I guess, about 4 o'clock the other day, and it was just starting to get light, and there were so many birds. So, that was really interesting to me to hear all these birds. And so there are a lot of good things, even right in the heart of the city. And we luckily have this nice big tree. It's not our tree, but that there's shade as the sun moves. So it's working out good for us.
Good.
So I'm just gonna record like 20 seconds of the empty sound.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Look.
Let me grab my stuff.
Did you go to Lawrence University, or how did you happen to move to Appleton?
I went to Oshkosh, UW Oshkosh. So after I graduated, I got a job with a company in Appleton.
Oh.
So I lived for 4 years in Oshkosh, and then I moved to Appleton. Lived there till 2009. So up to 5 more years, 5 years, and then after I got married, my wife lived in Sheboygan and she worked in Kohler. I was still working in Appleton, and I was commuting from Sheboygan to Appleton every day.
Wow.
And now I'm commuting from Sheboygan to Milwaukee every day. So,
It's a lot of commuting, huh?
well, yeah, one of us has to because our work, because of our work, one of us has to, and kind of decided that I will. Well, thank you very much for your
You're
time.
welcome.
You're very generous with your time, and I apologize. I just kept wanting to, keep the
Okay.
conversation going and keep talking.
That's okay. Don't worry about it. Oh, you got lots to all around, huh?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I hope you get lunch before you have to go to 1 o'clock thing.
Well,
We'll
yeah.
figure out, yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
So will we see you again at the end of all this, or no?
At the end of what?
Or
Everything.
the process?
Well, you'll see us definitely for the scanning first.
Right.
And after this field school is done, there is going to be some kind of exhibition at
Yeah,
on
presentation.
presentation and stuff
Okay.
on July 25th or something.
Yes.
Okay.
And Leo will be there. I will. I'm going to Pakistan to visit my parents. So I will be joining through Skype if I'm able to.
Great.
Okay.
So,
Well, good luck to both
All
of you
right.
guys.
thank you very
Thank
much.
you for your work.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for your work.
Nice to meet you.